Oh, hello there. This is Ghost Town Bob, aka Bob Goodwin, and I am just reading an issue of the Tombstone Epitaph, which is a monthly publication that comes out from Tombstone, Arizona, and it has articles in it on all sorts of Western historical figures and events. Right now, I've been reading an article here called "Old Men Forget." Uh, Stories of Butch Cassidy in Wyoming. And this article is written by the author is Mike Bell, who is a friend of mine and a prolific writer and researcher on the Wild Bunch and Butch Cassidy in particular, and particularly about his adventures and during the time that he lived in Wyoming. And this is an article that talks about some of the legends that surfaced in Wyoming during the 1930s about Butch Cassidy from people who claimed that they knew him. And he exposes this article. He just exposes uh, one story and shows how it may or may not have been true. Uh, he's the author of a book by the same title, which I have right here, which is called Old Men Forget Myths, Legends, and Stories of Butch Cassidy in Wyoming, 1889 through 1896, wherein he talks about many of the stories that cropped up in Wyoming during the 1930s and, uh, and talks about whether or not they may or may not have been accurate, which is an interesting take on the history of Butch Cassidy, actually looking and analyzing some of the sources that we've used over the years to highlight the life of Butch Cassidy. Uh, Much of the information that we have about Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid and the Wild Bunch uh, is accurate, but there's also a lot of legend mixed in with that, and there's also a lot of myth. What I want to do in this series of videos is to point to the truth about Butch Cassidy, the Sundance Kid, the Wild Bunch, and other outlaws in the Old West that were associated with them. And then I also want to point out or expose, well, I want to kind of celebrate some of the legends that have been built up about them. Legends sometimes are true, sometimes they're not true. But I do want to celebrate some of those legends, and then I also in this series want to expose some of the falsehoods, the myths, and the lies that have built up about the life of Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid and the other members of the Wild Bunch. Now, why am I doing this? Well, I have been over the years very interested in Old West history and Western history and particularly ghost towns. Since my name is Ghost Town Bob, I am the original Ghost Town Bob, and I have been interested in the Old West, and one of my other interests has always been outlaws of the Old West, particularly the Wild Bunch, Butch Cassidy, the Sundance Kid, the other members of the Wild Bunch, as well as associated gangs, the gangs of Blackjack Ketchum, the Hole in the Wall gang, the Brown's Hole gang, and the Robbers Roost gangs that were uh, prominent in the Old West during the 1880s and 1890s time period before the turn of into the 20th century. So that's what I'm going to be doing. I'm going to be digging deeper into the sources, the actual sources that there are to validate some of our claims and find out what the truth is behind those sources and exposing the false and the misleading from the truth. When we talk about old the history of the outlaws of the Old West, there's really only three types of sources that we can go into, three or four. The three major ones are newspaper accounts. Uh, Secondly, there's uh, letters and writings and documents that may exist at that time. And the third are the remembrances and the recollections of people that may or may not have known those outlaws and the stories that they told about them in the years way after their demise. So with that, we're going to go in and talk about some of those. I'm going to be coming on with videos just whenever I feel like it. When I have something interesting to say about these outlaws, or Butch Cassidy, or the Sundance Kid, or if I read something that I agree or disagree with, then I'll be coming on and uh, talking about those and explaining why I think they may or may not be accurate. Uh, when we talk about the different sources, uh, the newspaper accounts are very important. They carry the news of the time. And just like today, some newspaper accounts are very accurate, and other newspaper accounts are less than accurate and sometimes spread false rumors, innuendo, and misinformation, the same as they do today. When, but they do present what the views of people are uh, that were contemporaneous with the outlaws and what the views of the communities were surrounding the areas that these outlaws uh, roamed, because that is important to understand why or how these communities viewed these outlaws. The second source, the reminiscences or remembrances of people that may or may not have known these outlaws but claimed that they knew the outlaws. This is part of the reason for Mike Bell's book, is he wants to explain or highlight the ones that are accurate and highlight those that are inaccurate. Memories of people 30, 40, 50 years after the fact sometimes fade. Memories of one person can get confused with another person. They may have thought that they knew Butch Cassidy and they knew somebody else, possibly one of the imposters that came up during the 1920s and 30s that impersonated Butch Cassidy. They may have known them and not the real Cassidy, and as such, they told stories about them rather than Cassidy. Uh, some of them did know Butch Cassidy, but they wanted to promote and highlight and conflate some of their experiences with Butch and the boys, and as such, they exaggerated and made themselves a little bit more prominent in those stories. The third uh, source of information that we get are those of the contemporaries, letters that may have been written uh, uh, from like lawmen or sheriffs that may have been chasing these outlaws. Also, the records of the Pinkerton's National Detective Agency, which is a source of all sorts of information that they gather, just like any detective agency or police department. They gathered all sorts of stories and kept a lot of those stories. And as such, they uh, uh, have become a major repository of contemporary accounts and stories about the outlaws. Some of those are true, some of them are false. Just like any investigation that they were investigating, uh, they had true information and false information. And perhaps we can, over time, ferret out what the correct information that they had was and highlight some of the false information that they had. So that's what I'm going to be doing. some of the books that you may be interested in reading, if you're interested in Old West outlaws, are there's a lot of books on the Old West that go along with some of the movies that we've seen about the West. But a couple of books that you may be interested in obtaining or looking at are perhaps any of the books written by James D. Horan. He was uh, he wrote in the 1950s and 60s and 70s, and he had access to the files of the Pinkertons National Detective Agency before other people had access to those. And as such, uh, in his stories, he has a lot of information from the Pinkertons and what they had to say about these outlaws. Uh, Both of these books cover not only Butch Cassidy, the Sundance Kid, and the Wild Bunch, but all of the other Old West outlaws too uh, that there were out there. Jesse James, Billy the Kid, uh, and also he has books that talk about the lawmen of the Old West. So his books are always interesting. If you want something just on the Wild Bunch and Butch Cassidy, I could recommend The Outlaw Trail, The Story of Butch Cassidy. This book was written in the 1930s and had many uh, interviews that he conducted with people that from the time that knew Butch Cassidy and some of the happenings that actually happened. And this is a good basic book if you want to get to know about Butch Cassidy. If you want to dig in further about Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, this book here, Butch Cassidy, a biography by Richard Patterson, is a good book. It's well sourced and very detailed. It was written in the 1990s, and so a lot of the information is 30 years old, and there's been a lot of information that has been found since. But as a basic book and one that is a little bit more detailed and a little bit harder reading than Charles Kelly, that's a good book. If you're into alt history, uh, a good book to read is The Last of the Bandit Riders Revisited. This is a republication of Matt Warner, who was an associate of Butch Cassidy. He wrote his remembrances in a book called The Last of the Bandit Riders. Uh, Steve Lacy, a friend of mine, uh, has gotten copyright to that book and has republished it along with a lot of other information that he feels is pertinent. Some of it gets off into the area of alt history, which may or may not have happened. He has a lot of theories. I like him a lot, but some of his theories are a little out there. But it's a good read, and it has a lot of information in it. There's also a host of other books if you're interested in other outlaws. There's dozens of books on Butch Cassidy. There's books on the Ketchum Gang of New Mexico and Texas and Arizona. There's books on all of these, but these are the basic books that I would recommend people read. Not to be forgotten, last of all, is a book called Digging Up Butch and Sundance. Uh, get it right side up here for you. Uh, this is by Ann Meadows, who wrote this along with the researcher of her partner, Dan Buck. And they go into a lot of the South American adventures of Butch and Sundance when they were in South America. And they have tried hard to document what they feel is uh, the death of Butch Cassidy in 1908 in Bolivia. Uh, Parts of this book are controversial, but there's a lot of good history about Butch and Sundance before South America in it. And it reads like a travel guide, which in part it is. Uh, Anne is a very good writer and presented the research that she and Dan did in a very entertaining way. And it is a mess that you need to read if you're really interested in Butch and Sundance, because from there you get all of the other theories. Yeah, they will always be quoted by somebody, whether they agree with them or not. They will be quoted by them, and like I said, that book is very good and entertaining. I'd recommend it whether you agree with their theories or not on the deaths of Butch and Sundance. So anyway, I'll be coming to you whenever I feel like it with whatever I feel like talking about. I will also be doing videos on ghost towns, which is I don't know if it's my first love or second love, but but I still am interested in ghost towns, exploring the old ghost towns, and exploring as much as the site themselves, the histories of these towns, and what they have to contribute to the history of the West, and particularly the history of Utah. So with that, I will say goodbye, and we'll see you next time when I have something to say.